The first diplomatic meal between Earth and the Vesari delegation ended in catastrophe when Ambassador Krelz nearly projectile vomited into a potted plant. It had been a modest offering, just a plate of buffalo wings, some jalapeno poppers, and a small bowl of ghost pepper dip. The humans hadn't imagined alien physiology would be so fragile. Krelz, after taking a microscopic dab of the dip, had convulsed, emitted a high-pitched whistle, and collapsed. Fortunately, Vesari biology allowed for rapid self-stabilization, but the incident had been enough to spark an interstellar advisory. Effective immediately, all Earth spices were banned from diplomatic functions. The memo from the Vesari Health Council was blunt. Earth's capsaicin compounds are incompatible with Vesari oral sensory systems. Risk of neurological overload. Avoid ingestion at all costs. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, humans had taken great care to prepare bland, neutral meals for visiting species. Boiled potatoes, plain rice, steamed vegetables. No garlic, no onions, no color, no joy. Which is why the transport ship Hesperia's unexpected arrival at the Los Angeles Interplanetary Station drew so much attention. The Vesari hadn't sent a ship in over a year. When the hatch opened, the crew expected another high-ranking official, maybe Krelz again, this time with a reinforced stomach. Instead, a single Vesari stepped out. He was tall, lean, and his skin shifted through shades of copper and violet as he scanned the terminal. His translator unit flickered briefly before locking onto English. "I am Vilen of the House of Quen," he said. "I request cultural immersion." Customs didn't know what to make of that. Cultural immersion? That wasn't a standard category. After several calls and a scanned retina, Vilen was assigned a handler. Marshal Jennings didn't want the job. He was a field liaison, not a babysitter. But the department was stretched thin, and Vilen had diplomatic clearance. Marshal was handed a tablet with the Vesari's profile and a warning. "No spicy food. None." "I get it," Marshal said, flipping through the files. "No chili. No paprika. No fun." He met Vilen at the terminal's edge. "You picked a hell of a planet for cultural immersion." Vilen tilted his head. "I find Earth's volatility enlightening." "Great. Let's start with a coffee," Marshal said. 2 hours later, they were seated at a cafe in Venice Beach. Vilen wore a visor that filtered UV radiation and seemed mesmerized by the skateboarders crashing into curbs. Marshal sipped his coffee while Vilen took careful bites of a plain waffle. "Your sustenance lacks complexity," Vilen noted. Marshal raised an eyebrow. "You asked for mild. I did not request dull." "Same thing here." Vilen didn't respond. He watched a child walk past with a bag of flamin' Cheetos. "What is that?" Vilen asked. "Danger," Marshal said. "You remember Krelz? Puked his lungs out after licking a toothpick with hot sauce." "I read the report." "Then forget those." Marshal waved off the snack. "We're not going to the ER today." But Vilen's gaze lingered. The next 3 days were filled with the usual tourist traps. Vilen rode the tram at Universal Studios, wandered the Getty Center, and stood completely still for 43 minutes inside a Cinnabon, analyzing the scent matrix. Marshal caught him sniffing a bottle of sriracha at a grocery store. "I said no," Marshal warned. "I am not ingesting. I am observing." "You're pushing it." Vilen blinked slowly. Curiosity is not a crime. That night, Marshal locked the spice rack in his apartment. Just in case. On the 6th day, Vilen requested to visit a community gathering. Marshal took him to a local food festival in Pasadena. The place was packed with stalls offering everything from deep-fried Oreos to Ethiopian injera. Music blasted from speakers and children ran between tables with snow cones and hot dogs. Marshal turned to say something, but Vilen was gone. He scanned the crowd and spotted the Vesari at a small tent labeled Dante's Inferno Chili Challenge. Marshal pushed through the crowd just in time to see Vilen holding a toothpick with a droplet of crimson sauce. "Oh no, no, no." Vilen placed it on his tongue. The effect was immediate. His skin flashed from copper to blinding white, then pulsed red. A high-pitched tone escaped his throat and he staggered backward. People gasped. Marshal lunged, grabbing Vilen by the arm. "Call medics," someone shouted. But Vilen didn't collapse. He stumbled, coughed violently, then straightened. His eyes were wide. His chest heaved. Then he whispered again. You lunatic, Marshall said, dragging him away. You could have shut down your nervous system. I require more. You require a padded cell. Vilen's entire body was trembling, but he looked euphoric. That night, after a thorough scan at the international clinic which declared him unharmed but neurologically overstimulated, Vilen sat on Marshall's couch. You're lucky you didn't fry your brain, Marshall said, setting down a glass of water. Vilen took a sip. I have never felt such clarity. It was as if my entire existence was compressed into a single moment of fire and definition. That was ghost pepper extract. It's meant to hurt. It was magnificent. Marshall rubbed his temples. You're becoming a liability. I am ready for escalation. What the hell does that mean? Take me to the source. Marshall stared. You want stronger? Yes. You're insane. Vilen nodded slowly. Perhaps. But I understand now why your species thrives in chaos. You do not fear pain. You season your food with it. Marshall didn't sleep much that night. He kept replaying the moment Vilen's skin turned white, the way his pupils dilated like someone seeing God in a spoonful of lava. It wasn't normal. The next morning, Vilen made breakfast. Marshall entered the kitchen to the smell of something burning. What is that? I synthesized a sauce using habanero extract, vinegar, and fermented chili paste. Marshall grabbed a towel and waved at the smoke. You're not even supposed to be near that stuff. I have modified my internal regulation systems. I believe I can manage higher intensities. You're going to blow a hole in your gut. Vilen dipped a slice of bread into the sauce and chewed slowly. His eyes watered. His skin shimmered. But he smiled. Marshall poured himself cereal and sat down. You're not stopping, are you? No. Then we do this carefully. Controlled. No more random street stalls. Agreed. They spent the next week testing sauces. Vilen documented each reaction with scientific rigor. Mild salsa registered as pleasantly warm. Serrano-based sauces prompted euphoric tingling. The Trinidad scorpion mash nearly made him pass out. But he kept pushing. By the end of the month, Vilen could consume sauces that made seasoned chefs cry. Word spread. A Vesari was eating Earth's hottest dishes and loving it. A food blogger dubbed him the alien with an iron tongue. Vilen was invited to cooking shows, underground spice clubs, even an amateur hot wing gauntlet called the Fire Ladder. Marshall watched from the sidelines at one of the events. A crowd chanted as Vilen devoured a wing coated in apocalypse glaze. He's gonna die, the host whispered. No, Marshall said. He's going to ascend. Vilen didn't flinch. He held up the empty bone and raised his hand in victory. Afterward, he sipped milk with trembling fingers. I have touched the sun, he muttered. Marshall handed him a napkin. You've got sauce on your face. But not everything was celebration. One morning, Vilen collapsed in the shower. Marshall rushed him to the clinic. His internal temperature had spiked to dangerous levels. The doctors stabilized him, but the message was clear: his body was struggling. You can't keep doing this, Marshall said, sitting by his bed. I must. You're hurting yourself. I am evolving. Marshall stood. You're addicted. Vilen didn't argue. The next day he vanished. Left a note. I must understand the fire without limits. Marshall filed the report, but no one knew where Vilen had gone. Until 6 weeks later, when a video surfaced of a Vesari cooking in a New Orleans kitchen, stirring a vat of magma-colored gumbo. Marshall flew there immediately. He found Vilen in a tiny restaurant, serving dishes that made grown men cry. The Vesari looked thinner, but his eyes burned with purpose. I have found my path, Vilen said. You're running yourself into the ground. I am creating something new, a cuisine that unites sensation and spirit. Marshall looked around. The customers were eating through tears, gasping and smiling. It's impressive. It's only the beginning, Vilen said. Marshall sighed. Then let's at least make sure you survive it. Vilen nodded. And so began the next chapter, where flames didn't just burn, they transformed. By the time Marshall reached the alley behind the restaurant, Vilen was hunched over a steel trash bin, retching smoke through his nostrils. Not steam, actual smoke. You're literally combusting, Marshall said, grabbing the Vesari's shoulders and steadying him upright. I told you the capsaicin metabolite thresholds were unsustainable. I miscalculated the scorpion-oyster reduction, Vilen rasped, his tongue visibly blistered. A minor setback. Your esophagus looks like it's been sandblasted, Marshall snapped. You need a scope and a full GI panel. Now. Vilen staggered but resisted. I am adjusting. Organic systems require exposure to adapt. You're not a training montage, you're a respiratory hazard. I have recalibrated my intake intervals. The inflammation will pass. You're wheezing like a coal miner. Get in the van. They drove in silence. Vilen clutched a wet cloth soaked in oat milk and held it to his mouth like a compress. Marshall didn't speak again until they reached the UCLA Medical Research Annex. He bypassed the ER and took him straight to sublevel C where Dr. Rami kept a lab with the kind of equipment that didn't raise bureaucratic eyebrows. Rami was already gloved and snapping on a mask. You got him here fast, she said, checking Vilen's vitals. Tachycardia, elevated cortisol, oxygen saturations tanking. He's cooked from the inside out. He's been mainlining ghost pepper emulsions like their herbal tea. I told you this would happen, she muttered, adjusting the bioprobe. Get me a thermal scan and prep the nanocath. Vilen groaned. Tell her to avoid the mesenteric plexus. The still in post-reactive flux. Every time you talk, you make this worse, Marshall muttered. Rami scowled. You've inflamed your entire thoracic cavity. You're lucky your trachea hasn't delaminate. I require only localized cooling. You require a multi-layered anti-inflammatory protocol and 60 hours of silence, she retorted. They sedated him. The scan revealed microtears in the esophageal lining and capillary scarring in the lower stomach wall. Rami injected a targeted nanomesh that began binding the damaged tissues while simultaneously releasing a cooling agent. Marshall leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I thought you were just letting him play around with sauces, she said. Not fry his internal organs like he's a carnival snack. He left, Marshall said. I didn't even know where he was until the videos started showing up online. He's running an underground kitchen now. Underground? As in illegal? As in unlicensed, unregulated, and apparently booked solid for the next 2 months. Rami sighed. If he keeps this up, he'll collapse a lung or rupture something worse. I'm not sure he cares. Then you're not the one he's listening to. They kept him under observation for 30 hours. By the second day, the swelling in his throat had subsided and the burns along his digestive tract showed signs of regeneration. Vesari biochemistry was surprisingly cooperative once stabilized. He woke up at dawn and immediately tried to sit up. Nope, Rami said, pressing him back down. You're on ice for another 12 hours. I must refine the emulsification ratios. The texture was wrong. You're lucky your epiglottis still functions. Marshall stood at the foot of the bed and tossed a pair of dark glasses onto the sheets. You've been recognized, he said. The footage hit the Interstellar Culture Network. You're trending under extraterrestrial gastronomic extremes. Vilen blinked. What does that mean? Means you've got fans. And critics. And a Vesari ethics committee requesting a formal inquiry into your mental fitness. Let them inquire. I am not obligated to mimic their sterilized preferences. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire either. Vilen's tone shifted. They avoid what challenges them. I seek it. Marshall sat down. You know, this whole thing started because you said you wanted cultural immersion. But you're not learning about Earth. You're getting high off capsaicin like it's a spiritual awakening. It is not a high, Vilen said. It is a confrontation. With what? Limits. Rami rolled her eyes. You've got a perforated gut and a fanbase of masochists. Congratulations. Vilen's recovery took 4 days. During that time, he refused sedatives and insisted on analyzing the chemical profiles of various spice oils through a digital microscope. He took notes obsessively, cross-referencing flavor volatility against thermal resistance metrics. On the 5th morning, Marshall found him standing outside the lab holding a sealed container. What's that? A stabilized compound, Vilen said. Balanced for maximum sensory engagement with minimal tissue degradation. You made a hot sauce that doesn't kill people? I synthesized a new strain of capsaicin bonded with a mucosal buffer. The result is intensity without necrosis. Marshall hesitated. You want me to try it, don't you? It will not harm you. That's not the same as tasting good. Vilen opened the lid and handed him a toothpick. Marshall dipped it cautiously and touched it to his tongue. His left eye twitched. His ears rang. The air tasted like electricity. But then somehow it leveled out, settling into a warmth that expanded without burning. I hate how impressed I am, he muttered. I call it resonance. Of course you do. They left the lab that afternoon. News had spread across multiple sectors: Zarathi food critics, a chlorine spice trader consortium, even a culinary AI from the Epsilon Ring had requested samples of Vilen's sauces. The New York Times ran a headline, "Alien Chef Redefines Pain Cuisine." A week later, a public demonstration was arranged in San Francisco's Interplanetary Culinary Theater. Vilen was scheduled to prepare a full-course meal with escalating spice levels designed for multi-species audiences. Marshall watched the prep from backstage. Vilen worked with a focus bordering on trance. Ingredients floated in midair as he manipulated utensils with magnetic gloves, layering sauces and emulsions with surgical precision. The crowd was a mix of humans, Martellans, and even 2 Vesari delegates who wore filtration masks. They sat cautiously with data pads monitoring Vilen's every movement. When the first course was served, a hush fell over the room. It was a translucent cube of what looked like jelly, but glowed faintly with pulsing color bands. A Martellan dignitary poked it with a claw. "Is it safe?" "It's not lethal," Marshall said. The cube melted on contact with the tongue. The Martellan's eyes went wide, and he let out a clicking trill that Marshall could only assume was approval. The Vesari delegates tasted theirs with surgical swabs. One of them blinked rapidly and began muttering into a translator. "He calls it a violation of sensory passivity," Marshall said, reading the translation. "That's probably a compliment," Vilen said, approaching with the next course. By the 5th dish, a human chef in the audience stood and began clapping. Others joined in, some laughing through tears, others fanning their mouths with napkins. Marshall spotted a Zarathi ambassador holding back hiccups while giving a thumbs up with all 6 limbs. After the final course, a spiral of caramelized peppers infused with resonance extract, a Martellan collapsed into his seat and declared, "My soul has developed taste buds." Vilen bowed once. Backstage, Marshall handed him a towel. "You just turned interstellar diplomacy into a cooking show." "It was never about food," Vilen said. "It was about transformation." "Now what?" Vilen tilted his head. "Now I teach." 2 days later, he announced the opening of the Galactic Culinary Exchange, a rotating academy for taste exploration open to all species willing to sign a waiver. Marshall stood at the entrance, watching the line form: humans, aliens, even a robotic sensory unit fitted with a synthetic tongue. "You're going to blow up the concept of cuisine," he said. Vilen adjusted his apron. "Evolution begins at the palate." 3 weeks after the Galactic Culinary Exchange opened its doors, a Vesari health envoy landed unannounced in Sacramento and filed a formal injunction. Marshall found out when a courier drone dropped a printed document on his windshield while he was parked outside a Thai noodle shack. The first line read, "Cease all spice-based cross-species ingestion experiments pending psychological evaluation and environmental risk assessment." He drove straight to the exchange. It was housed in a converted aerospace testing hangar on the edge of the Mojave Desert, now refitted with industrial stovetops, cryo chambers, and a dome-shaped spice inhalation simulator that looked like it belonged in an astronaut training facility. Vilen was in the outdoor courtyard, guiding a tentacled chlorine through a chili oil emulsification technique using a pair of tongs and a rotating magnetic skillet. The chlorine's translator warbled something about flavor transcending spatial geometry. Marshall held up the document. "You've been shut down." Vilen didn't look up. "On what grounds?" "Biochemical overreach, unlawful interspecies exposure, and reckless disregard for digestive diplomacy." "That last one is not a recognized legal term." "They made it one." Vilen finally turned, wiping his gloves on a towel. "Who filed it?" "Counselor Tira of Vesari Sector 9. She's on her way here." "You've got maybe 6 hours." Vilen glanced at the line of students gathered near the fermentation lab. "I will prepare. You're not going to charm your way out of this with a bowl of soup." "I don't intend to." At 10 minutes past dusk, a sleek obsidian shuttle descended onto the landing pad just west of the spice vault. Counselor Tira emerged flanked by 2 Vesari medics and a cultural safety officer. She wore a neural filtration mask and carried a scanner the size of a lunchbox. Marshall met her halfway across the gravel. "This is a mistake," he said. "He's not hurting anyone." He is destabilizing established biological norms, Tira replied, calibrating the scanner with a single twitch of her fingers. 14 species have reported adverse reactions. 2 had to regrow taste buds. No one's being forced to try the food. They volunteer. Consent does not negate risk. Marshall sighed. Then at least let him demonstrate. 1 meal. If it's unsafe, I'll shut the place down myself. Tira paused, then nodded once. Controlled environment. Monitored intake. No improvisation. Vilen met them in the spice chamber where the walls pulsed dim blue and the air was filtered twice per second. He wore a plain apron and carried a set of calibrated pipettes. Tira raised an eyebrow. No theatrics? Only structure, Vilen said. He prepared 3 dishes, each tailored to a different species' sensory thresholds. The first was a gel-based infusion for the aquatic-blooded Relin, using fermented citrus and a whisper of capsaicin bonded to a protein stabilizer. The second, for a silicon-based ambassador, was a vaporized mist embedded with molecular flavor particles that could be absorbed through dermal pores. The third was for Tira herself. She hesitated. You don't have to, Marshall said. I must determine the source of the disruption, she replied. Vilen placed a single droplet of the resonance extract on a thin slice of cooled root starch. Tira took it, held it to the light, and placed it on her tongue. Her pupils narrowed. She inhaled through her teeth. The medic stepped forward, but she raised a hand. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Finally, she exhaled. It is intense, she said, but not destabilizing. It is tuned to your neural oscillations, Vilen replied. I do not serve chaos. I serve precision. Tira set the slice down. You've modified the compounds. I've mapped over 600 species thresholds. Each formulation is unique. She handed the scanner to the safety officer. Verify. While the device chirped through its analysis routines, Vilen led her to the fermentation wing. There, a human botanist and a Martellon sensory biologist were overseeing a spice garden grown in nutrient-rich substrate harvested from meteorite dust. The peppers glowed faintly under black light. This is the Terra fusion strain, the botanist said. We hybridized Earth's Carolina Reaper with a Zolari thermal blossom. It's not edible raw, but under pressure cooking, it produces a compound that stimulates both pleasure and memory centers. Tira examined the plant. You've created a neurogastronomic stimulant. We created flavor that tells a story. The scanner beeped. The safety officer frowned, then looked up. No neural degradation. No involuntary spike in cortisol. No systemic toxicity. Tira studied Vilen for a long moment. You could have poisoned half a galaxy, she said. I could have, Vilen replied. But I did not. Outside, the sun had long since vanished. The dome was lit with soft amber lights, and the students had gathered in quiet clusters, some sharing small samples, others tinkering with recipe molecules on holographic pads. Tira walked among them. A human teen was explaining the fermentation cycle of kimchi to a gelatinous tax accountant from the Ilari Belt. A retired Vesari engineer was attempting to recreate Sichuan dry pot using hydrogel cubes. This is not just cuisine, Tira said. No, Vilen replied. It is identity, translated. She turned to Marshall. You will register this facility with the Interstellar Culinary Standards Board. You will submit monthly reports. And you will install a neural feedback monitor in every preparation chamber. Marshall nodded. And if he causes one allergic reaction in a species not yet mapped? We shut it down, Marshall said. Tira stepped back toward her shuttle. Then I will file an amendment. She disappeared into the ship. The engines hummed, then lifted her off the ground without a sound. Vilen looked at Marshall. That was less violent than expected. You're lucky she didn't bring a citation drone. The next morning, the exchange was officially approved for multi-species operation under Clause 12 of the Xenogastronomic Ethics Accord. A plaque was mounted near the entrance. Vilen refused to attend the ceremony. Instead, he was in the lab distilling a new batch of resonance. Marshall entered without knocking. You did it. There is still refinement to be done. I mean, you're not getting shut down. You can keep teaching. Vilen placed a vial into a cooling chamber. I never intended to stop. They stood in silence for a moment. Marshall finally broke it. You ever going to try something mild again? I once consumed boiled rice. And? It was like breathing air with no atmosphere. You're impossible. Vilen nodded, but calibrated. Later that evening, a shipment arrived from the Vesari homeworld. Inside was a small envelope and a glass container filled with a translucent liquid. Marshall opened the note. It read, "A contribution to your curriculum. Vesari root nectar, aged 90 years. Best enjoyed with contrast." Vilen held the container to the light. "They scent flavor." "You broke them," Marshall said. "In the nicest way possible." Vilen poured a droplet onto a spoon. "Let us see what peace tastes like." They stood in the courtyard, surrounded by the scent of spice and ozone, and tasted the future.